what General Zanussi recently said. So he said that he thought that such a number of losses as we inflicted would stop anyone, but it did not stop Russia. So it's that notion that the modern warfare that we're seeing, the scale of warfare in Ukraine, is out of sync with our recent thinking and experience.
Can you talk us through the current numbers for the army? And I mean, it would just be unrealistic to have a very large army just permanently on standby in case of dark times. This must be a conversation that quite a few countries are having.
Well, the army's going down to 73,000 by 2025, but as Michael Clark was saying, retention and recruitment is such that we're probably likely to get below that figure in short order. But it's not the raw figure which is really the issue. It's what capability you can buy within the headroom that you've got. And what Patrick Saunders really did was he didn't call for conscription, but he defined things as a pre-war moment. Now, of course, there is a framing bias with that because you could also take the view that actually we're in the long peace. And really, what you need to do is reinforce the long peace. And you can do that by certain ways, turn as long as it takes for Ukraine, picking up on the points of your last guest, into whatever victory takes for Ukraine. That would be the best way to make sure you don't have to have a bigger army in the first place. The second one would be to re emphasize NATO's key role in deterrence and defence, and it has been the most successful alliance in history with 75th anniversary this year. But the third unwritten one, it seems to me, both in terms of Admiral Rob Bauer's thing in the chairman of the Military Council Committee in NATO earlier last week, and what CGS has said, is really a warning to European NATO because there are two elections this year. One really doesn't matter. That's the Putin election. He's really just saying he's going to be president again, Putin 5.0. But the second one, which really does matter, is the one in America. If Trump follows through with what he said in 2016 in terms of, seeing NATO and Europe as ungrateful
Yeah.
freeloaders.
Yep. So there are dark times ahead. We're definitely feeling that. And I think what our listeners will really want to know more about is the notion of a citizen army. So when the head of the army says that civilians must be trained and equipped to form a citizen army, what is he imagining?
Well, I think you have to go back first to the myths that we need to let go of about war. And these were best articulated in 2017 by General Mark Milley, who was the outgoing chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in America, said these in 2017, so pertinent because this was before Ukraine. The first myth, wars will be short, they might not, and we're nearly at 700 days in Ukraine, so you need sustainability and availability. The second myth, armies fight wars. They don't. Nations fight wars. So you need to understand the bridge between society unwilling or willing and an army capable or incapable. The third myth, armies are easy to create. They're not. And we saw that in Afghanistan. The fourth, you can win wars from afar just by dropping ordnance. You can't. At times, you do need boots on the ground. So that sets the context for this. And really, this is what General Zanussi recently said. So he said that he thought that such a number of losses as we inflicted would stop anyone, but it did not stop Russia. So it's that notion that the modern warfare that we're seeing, the scale of warfare in Ukraine, is out of sync with our recent thinking and experience. And what he's really doing is articulating that. I think what he's really done is produce a kind of strawman. That is a draft proposal designed to generate discussion and perhaps new and better ideas about how we do this. What has been missing from most recent defence reviews are two strategic concepts which were always there in the distant past. The first one is regeneration, making sure they've got enough manpower, equipment, and industrial base for the army that you've got at the moment. And the second one is reconstitution, how you expand all of those into the new forum if you do need a new citizen army. And it's that what he said
Yeah.
in terms of regular armies start wars and citizen armies finish them.
But the actual term citizen army, does that imply a form of conscription in your mind? And are we saying that we would actually have to train people to be able to fight? Or is a citizen army, by its very nature and by its very term, an army that's, kind of stays here and does other things? Because we've seen both those two things happening in Ukraine, haven't we?
Well, all those things could, of course, be true at the same time. What was interesting about the speech, from what you just said, is that the speech was released by the Army, not by the Ministry of Defence, who clarified that they weren't talking about and, sort of had the clarification klaxon that national service was not part of what this envisaged. What you'd really want to see, if you need people to expand people, is that you have motivated people who would join because they see it as a vital interest for the UK's interest. What we've been pretty bad at doing in the last 20 years is defining what that vital interest is. Why are the sea routes of vital interest to us? Why are the
Yeah.
undersea cables in the North Sea of vital interest to us? Why is NATO of vital interest to us?
But you really need to look at those key problems that you've already talked about, recruitment and retention, because if the army is struggling to recruit people who want to be part of it, then wouldn't a citizen army really struggle to recruit people who, previously had no intention of joining up?
Well, that's right. And you might recall that last year we had a notion in September of some sort of national civil service. And actually, a YouGov report in last year did reflect upon would you join up to do military service for 1 year? And Generation Z were absolutely against that. Only 28% of people were up for the notion of 1 year's military service, 29% were up for the notion of 1 month's military service. And the most opposed to it, of course, were the 18 to 24 cohort. So only 10% of those actually supported that sort of military service. But I think if they knew, for example, that all the subsea cables were cut and they couldn't get on TikTok, and that the internet was absolutely out of their, they couldn't get on the internet and everything else, they might perceive what vital interest actually meant to them.
Well, yes, they absolutely they absolutely would, but they wouldn't have the first clue where to go to join an army if all of those things happened. It's good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time. That's Major General Chip Chapman, who's a former senior British military advisor. If this had happened in your youth, and I'm not saying you're old,
No.
but let's say that we were both in our 30s and we were called upon by our nation to form part of a citizen army, would you see that in a kind of enthusiastic light?
Well, look, I've read plenty of social history of World War II, and I'd like to think that I'd have done my bit if I'd been around at the time. Quite what I could have done usefully, I don't know.
But I think that's very different as a concept, what you would have done in the Second World War. I think
Right.
times have changed,
You're asking what
fighting
I'd do
has
now?
changed. Yes. Yeah.
I think it's tempting to make a sort of fatuous remark, but this is deadly serious,
Yeah.
isn't it? I would, of course, I would. I think Britain's worth defending. I mean, like I say, I'm not quite sure what I could do to contribute to that, but I would have a good old go. I mean, I think that it's so interesting, isn't it? Because the recruitment is clearly a massive problem.